LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the January 30th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing. Today I'll be showing the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, which should be really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. I'm using some new hardware and hopefully it's all working out. I can't use my external camera, so I'm using the webcam from my new MacBook here, and the framing's kind of weird, and I don't know if it looks weird to you, but hopefully I'll have it all worked out by next week. But anyway, my main topic, as you can see from the title of the video, is police reform fails again, because you know that I've been covering the topic of police reform and even defunding the police and uh, even abolishing the police. I work with some people who actually think that the police should be abolished. Oh, I see G Wolf 333 in the live comments saying ACAB there. That I do work in coalition with people who believe all cops are bastards. That's the whole ACAB thing. But uh, I'm gonna talk about that extensively. I also put down under sources in the video description a video I made a while back titled "Cops." I actually put it in cops, justice system, racist, classist, or both. And it's actually kind of a book review of oh uh it's a book review of both this book that's been over my left shoulder for pretty much the whole time I've been doing this live stream, The New Jim Crow here, by Michelle Alexander, that explains how our after the Jim Crow era, when we had legal apartheid in the United States, it morphed into a race neutral system that still does the same work that Jim Crow did. And then also in that video, I talk about Matt Taibbi's book, The Divide. Matt Taibbi is now like apparently right wing or whatever, but well, I mean, he isn't really right wing, but he is much more. Did some of the Twitter files, and he appears on Fox News. You know, like Glenn Greenwald. Also, I've kind of hidden my Glenn Greenwald book right next to that. No Place to Hide is actually hidden back here. The Glenn Greenwald book, but Matt Taibbi's book and Michelle Alexander's book are both sort of reviewed in my video, Cops, Justice System, Racist, Classist, or Both. If you're interested in seeing what I said about that in the pre-George Floyd years. And one of the things that I've kind of parted company with Matt Taibbi on is he believes the whole Trump talking points, the right-wing talking points, that Russia collusion was a hoax, or and I've seen him called on it, and he doesn't really deal with the facts very well. And if you hang on to the end of my live stream, I'm actually going to have a couple off-topic clips. Uh, both there's one that I guess I'm going to be calling Chuck Todd tries to cross-examine Representative Jim Jordan's fire hose of misinformation, but still gets wet. What do you think? Chuck Todd tries to cross-examine Representative Jim Jordan's fire hose of misinformation, but still gets wet. He does some good, on-the-spot cross-examination, but he lets a lot get by. And part of it has to do with the Russia collusion hoax, which isn't a hoax. And I will have a clip at the end of Adam Schiff explaining how the things he said about the evidence of collusion actually weren't dishonest. So those will be the last two clips if you want to hang on past my police reform failure topic. That will be the vast majority of the news summaries and the newsmaker clips here. And for the political comedy, I mean, the horrific video that we all saw that was released on Friday, where I guess most of us saw, and you're going to see some clips of it in the news summaries coming up. Even on Fox News, they can't really spin it in a pro-cop way, and they're definitely the most pro-cop network, but they are kind of finding a way to spin it. There's this weird talking point I've heard on Fox News, and I saw it on this show. It's this Trey Gowdy show on Sunday nights on Fox News. Trey Gowdy used to be a Republican member of Congress, and he was like a federal prosecutor who said he was a bad prosecutor at one point. But anyway, he had this criminal defense attorney, so-called Jonah Splibor, on, and she expressed this talking point I've heard where they're actually trying to blame what happened in Memphis on the defund the police movement, or the demonizing of police. They're saying, and well, you'll have to see it for yourself to draw your own conclusion as to whether this is like ridiculous spin. I will make the argument it is ridiculous spin after we watch that clip together.
Start with you. Memphis. Is what happened in Memphis murder one, murder two, or something else?
What a great question, because I asked myself the same thing. Certainly murder charges, I should say, are appropriate here. How planned was this? I'm struck by a couple of things. First, it seems the police officers fabricated a reason to pull Tyre Nichols over to begin with. Now, normally, look, cops don't need a big reason to pull somebody over. Something stupid hanging from the rear view, failure to stay right. They invented a reckless driving charge, and then what happened? They never gave this man an opportunity to simply get a ticket and keep on going. And what strikes me, the second thing that strikes me is there were five, not one, not two, five officers exhibiting what can only be described as a gang mentality. What is going on here? Have we so dehumanized the police over the last few years that its prophecy fulfilled? The police can no longer act human? These five sure didn't.
Yeah, I've seen some terrible things.
So yeah, that was the argument there that I thought was kind of ridiculous, but I've heard it in various different forms. Like, we defunded the police so much that we can't get good police is one of the arguments I've heard on Fox News. Of course, there are very few places where anyone ever defunded the police, but then that was, I don't remember anyone, was that like a campaign that anyone ever talked about, dehumanize the police? Everyone on the left has been claiming dehumanize the police. Well, I guess all cops are bastards, but I mean, bastards are human. That's not dehumanizing the police. But anyway, that I found that totally a ridiculous talking point that I've been here. And actually, Jim Jordan, in a part of the Chuck Todd clip I didn't take, he kind of made that, like, we've been like defunding the police and now we don't have good police anymore. Or he said something like that, I think, to Chuck Todd, but that's not the clip I'm going to show at the end. I almost use for my political comedy, this is always, I mean, talk about your dark humor or your black humor, black humor in multiple ways here. This is the original tweet from the Memphis Police Department about what happened to Tyre Nichols. It's still up. I put a link down under sources. By the way, under sources in the video description, there's a link to that entire discussion with Trey Gowdy, Jonah Splibor, and then this third guy, Paul Morrow, a former cop who has his own theories that I apparently have developed since last night into some article he wrote, but I didn't have a chance to read. But anyway, if that's one of the things under sources, but also under sources, you can see the early morning, like 4 a.m. January 8th tweet from the Memphis Police Department. And here I put this is what they said. On January 7th, at approximately 8:30 p.m., officers in the area of Rains Road and Ross Road attempted to make a traffic stop for reckless driving. That turned out not to be true, at least as far as we can tell so far. As officers approached the driver of the vehicle, a confrontation occurred, and the suspect fled the scene on foot. Well, as you saw from the video, they tore him out of the vehicle violently when he was just saying, "What did I do?" And then while attempting to take the suspect into custody, he fled after he was pepper sprayed and tased or whatever. But While attempting to take the suspect into custody, another confrontation occurred. However, the suspect was ultimately apprehended. And this is the worst sentence right here. Afterward, the suspect complained of having a shortness of breath, at which time an ambulance was called to the scene. That that does not match what happened in the video at all. I mean, the suspect, I mean, he couldn't even speak at the time. I mean, after the beating, he was just kind of like moaning and being propped up on the side of that vehicle, and he kept like falling over. And but I mean, it kind of reminds me of the original reporting on George Floyd, which didn't mention the most important facts. That, like, anyway, that's, you can still look at the tweet if you click on the link down under sources, that they still have that up from the morning of January 8th. And so uh, always remember that, like, the first version of events you get from the cops, and that's usually what you see in your local paper, because they have like great sources in the police department, and they just sort of like print the cops version a lot of the time, and it's like the best spin the cops on the scene could put on whatever the terrible thing is that happened. And so yeah, that's something I also wanted to share with you all. And I'm going to get to the news summaries from longest to shortest, and the longest one this week is the Fox News Sunday one with Shannon Bream. They actually, like I said, they actually reported on this, but I still think they they showed the least amount of the body cam footage. They prominently put the one of the officers claims that he's going to fight the charges near the front of the report. And they also mix it in with this story, I guess they had planned, that, you know, Biden is finally sending tanks to Ukraine but they also say with this like long extending war. It's like this weird story, and I'll include that both the Charles Watson report and the Lucas Tomlinson report that shows the Biden administration response to what happened in Memphis, but also this Ukraine story where, like, we're finally sending tanks for this conflict that's taking too long, but the tanks are going to take too long. And then they don't even mention, like, the whole thing was this delicate deal to get the German Leopard tanks in there. But I'll talk about that after we watch the longest news summary from Fox News Sunday yesterday morning together over here.
Hello from Fox News in Washington. Breaking this weekend, there are new calls for justice as Americans collectively take in video of an appalling police encounter in Memphis. It shows the brutal beating of 29-year-old Tyre Nichols at the hands of police. Nichols later died of those injuries. The White House, lawmakers, law enforcement leaders all across the U.S. all expressing outrage. And there are new concerns this morning about the drawn-out war in Ukraine. The U.S. has agreed to send advanced tanks to the front lines, but it could take up to a year for them to actually get there. We've got a lot to cover this morning. In a moment, Republican Congressman Michael McCaul and Democratic Congressman Adam Smith join us live to discuss. But we begin with team coverage this morning. Lucas Tomlinson live at the White House on the decision to ramp up military aid to Ukraine and that timeline about it actually getting there. But first, to Charles Watson live in Memphis, where the community is reeling. And we should note some of the images in his report are very troubling. Hello, Charles.
Hey, good morning, Shannon. 5 former Memphis police officers are set to be arraigned on February 17th after being charged with second-degree murder in the death of 29-year-old Tyre Nichols. Brutal body cam video shows officers savagely beating Nichols during a January 7th traffic stop. In a moment, we will show video of that confrontation, and we want to warn viewers it is disturbing. But first, we are now starting to hear from lawyers representing several of those officers. At least 2 of the attorneys say their clients will plead not guilty. An attorney who represents former officer Desmond Mills Jr. urged patience, saying they are, quote, confident that the questions of whether Desmond crossed the lines that others crossed and whether he committed the crimes charged will be answered with a resounding no. On the video shared by the city of Memphis, you see officers aggressively yank Nichols from his car and tase him before they're later seen relentlessly kicking, punching, and pepper spraying Nichols after he runs away from their initial encounter. It would take more than 20 minutes for Nichols to receive medical attention as he sat bloodied less than 200 yards away from his mother's home, who he had been calling on for help. The 29-year-old died 3 days later.
For a mother to know that their child was calling them in their need and I wasn't there for him, do you know how I feel right now? Because I wasn't there for my son.
Nichols' family has called for peaceful demonstrations, and that has largely been the case as protesters take to the streets here in Memphis and cities around the country demanding justice for Tyre. The Shelby County District Attorney announced charges Thursday, and defense attorney Phil Holloway, who was not associated with this case, says what happened is indefensible.
These guys are going to prison, every one of them. They probably will spend the rest of their lives in prison.
At least some of the officers were a part of the Memphis Police Department's Scorpion unit. That task force has been permanently deactivated. Meantime, a funeral service is set for Nichols on Wednesday, with Reverend Al Sharpton expected to deliver a eulogy. Shannon?
Charles Watson reporting from Memphis, Tennessee. Charles, thank you very much. And we've got a deep dive into that tape, into what happens next. Our legal panel is just minutes away. Now, though, let's go to Lucas Tomlinson at the White House. Hello, Lucas.
Shannon, President Biden said he offered his condolences directly to the Nichols family and says right now the image of America on the world stage is at stake.
If I can get a piece of advice.
Yes, sir.
Get really rough. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
The president also saying in a statement he is outraged, and this is a reminder of, quote, the profound fear and trauma, the pain, and the exhaustion that Black and brown Americans experience every single day. Republican Senator Tim Scott, who has championed some police reforms, called the attack vile, saying, quote, let it serve as a call to action for every lawmaker in our nation. Biden this week also making a move on Ukraine, finally relenting to give them American M1A2 Abrams tanks. As Russia's invasion of Ukraine nears the one-year mark, U.S. officials privately say neither side is winning. And British intelligence shows the front lines have not significantly changed in 6 months. The hope is U.S. tanks will help Ukraine to break through the front lines and miles of trenches dug by Russian forces. But officials say the U.S. tanks won't arrive for many months. Other European allies will send them sooner. The Kremlin called the tanks a dangerous escalation. President Biden says that's not true.
It is not an offensive threat to Russia.
A former member of the Trump administration and a former general saying the losses nearly 1 year in are staggering.
The casualties on both sides are enormous. When we were in there, we were told that the Ukrainians have lost about 100,000 soldiers killed. That's massive. And the Russians have probably lost about 150,000 killed, or up to 200,000.
On Capitol Hill, more Democratic lawmakers say they're frustrated with the White House's handling of classified information. Former Vice President Mike Pence says he found some as well in his home in Indiana and tells Fox's Rich Edson he takes full responsibility. Shannon?
Lucas Tomlinson reporting at the White House. Lucas, thank you very much. Joining us now, Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Michael McCaul. Congressman, welcome.
So, yeah, I won't have a Michael McCaul clip, and I pretty much pre-criticized some of that news coverage. You saw how the statement of lack of responsibility of Desmond Mills, who I guess may be one of the 5 officers who's been charged with murder, who may have like the least responsibility, maybe. I guess we'll see as the facts come out. But anyway, they, as the most pro-cop network, Fox News definitely featured that. And then you saw in the Lucas Tomlinson report, when they finally got to the Ukraine thing, they're talking about how long and drawn out the Ukraine conflict is, because there's like a pro-Putin faction of the Republican Party who's not happy about all the money and support going to Ukraine. And they talked about how maybe the U.S. tanks are going to help break through the lines that haven't moved in the last 6 months, but they're not going to get there for over a year. And then there was this like one little line in there, I noticed having watched this the 3rd time now, that where Lucas Tomlinson says, well, tanks from European allies may get there sooner or whatever. But that was like the whole point of Biden so-called finally relenting and sending the Abrams tanks, which are really high maintenance and they run on jet fuel, and they're, not the best tanks for the Ukraine situation, but Germany wouldn't send their Leopard tanks or allow other NATO members who had German Leopard tanks to send them, unless the U.S. sent tanks first because they wanted that cover, not to be, I've seen multiple comedians make jokes about, like, it's never really good news when you hear that, like, German tanks are rolling across Europe or whatever. I guess Germany is, like, extra sensitive about sending tanks east through Ukraine towards Russia or whatever, or they just they wanted the United States to send Abrams tanks as cover, so it doesn't really matter how long it's going to take for the Abrams tanks to get there, because it was all this, like, delicate diplomatic deal to get German Leopard tanks, which are much more useful in the conflict to the forces in Ukraine, and I think that was totally underplayed in that reporting from Lucas Tomlinson on Fox News. And anyway, like I said, I pretty much pre-criticized the clip, but now I've also post-criticized the clip, and that gets me to the next news summary, which is the Meet the Press. I actually think ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, the news summary after this, is a little bit better, but this is just Chuck Todd, and he does ask the question about police reform that I put in my title, like, and he points out it didn't happen after George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. Is this going to be the spark that gets federal police reform, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which died in the last Congress? He does ask that question, but I also think that, well, I'll explain after we watch this one and the next one why I think ABC's a little better. But here's Chuck Todd. He doesn't have the biggest, longest package. I saw people talking about that in the live comments earlier, because he's doing this thing where he doesn't have a long pre-recorded video package after his initial live introduction narration. Now he, like, narrates in between the clips, and that's what you'll see here. And you'll also see a lot more extensive clips from the Memphis police officers' body cams, the Friday release video. That was the other thing I criticized Fox News for, that they really minimized the amount of video of that they showed. Not like you really want to see it again, but you're going to see how the different networks feature it, including NBC News Meet the Press, in the clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning. After the murder of George Floyd, there seemed to be a bipartisan consensus that something had to be done on the national level, but nothing happened. Now we're watching this brutal beating of Tyre Nichols in Memphis, Tennessee, and asking, how can this be happening again? And will this be the moment that sparks real action nationally? Look, it's not a secret that Americans are losing confidence in their institutions, including the police, and their political leaders in general. In fact, our new NBC News poll that's out this morning paints a picture of a deeply pessimistic country, distrustful of government in general, with an overall outlook that is historically bleak. Asked to describe where America is headed in the next year, more than 2/3 use negative words and phrases: downhill, wrong track, disaster, hard times, and uncertain. It's both sides of the aisle, folks. This isn't just one-sided. Full 71% of Americans say the nation is on the wrong track. We are in the longest sustained period of a wrong track number that high in the history of our poll. It's nearly been 2.5 years of this sustained pessimism. It's longer than the 2008 financial crisis. And now the country is reeling after the release of this graphic video. We're here to warn you again. This video is very disturbing. In an assault caught on police surveillance and body cameras, Memphis police officers punched, kicked, tased, pepper sprayed, and swung a baton at 29-year-old Tyre Nichols, who was unarmed. Nichols was pulled over in a traffic stop, which the police department initially said was due to, quote, reckless driving. But Memphis Police Chief C.J. Davis, who has called the killing of Nichols heinous, reckless, and inhumane, says investigators have been unable to substantiate that claim. Again, this video is disturbing. Here's a portion.
Damn, I didn't do anything. Hey, I didn't hurt your ass ground. All right. On the ground. Hey, you don't do that, okay? Get on the ground. Get on the ground. Okay. Tase your ass. All right. I'm on the ground. Lay down. Lay down. Yes, sir. Lay down. Please stay on the ground. I think tase you. Get on the ground. Lay down. One. Now. I'm tasing. All right. Okay. All right.
After an officer pepper sprayed Nichols' face and used a taser on him, even though he was not resisting, Nichols then twisted himself away from officers and started to run away. Minutes later, officers caught up with him. He was less than 100 yards from his home.
Wipe you. Hey.
Give me your hand. Give me your hand. Give me your hand.
You might get sprayed again. Hey. Hey, Mike. Give me that, bro. Watch out. Watch out. Watch out.
Give me your hand.
Mom. Hey.
Give me your hand. Give me.
Okay. All right.
Give me your hands. Give me your.
All right. Okay. All right. Huh? Hey, Mike, give me your hands, bro.
Give me your hands.
Watch out. Spray your ass again.
Hey, give me your hands, bro.
Watch out.
Spray. Give me your hands, bro.
After the officers stopped beating Nichols, it took 28 minutes for an ambulance to take Nichols to the hospital. He would die in the hospital 3 days later. Nichols worked for FedEx and had a 4-year-old son. 5 officers have been fired and charged with second-degree murder, aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, official misconduct, and official oppression. The Justice Department is conducting a civil rights investigation into the death. 2 Shelby County Sheriff's deputies have also been relieved of duty pending an internal investigation, as well as 2 members of the Memphis Fire Department. All of them were seen in the longer version of that video. Protests erupted across the country from Memphis to New York to Los Angeles. And in a statement late on Friday, President Biden called the killing, quote, yet another painful reminder of the profound fear and trauma, the pain and the exhaustion that Black and brown Americans experience every single day.
For me to find out that my son was calling my name and I was only feet away and did not even hear him. You have no clue how I feel right now. No clue.
I spoke with Tyre's mother and expressed my condolences and told her that I was going to be making the case to the Congress to pass the George Floyd Act. It has a lot to say and do with the image of America. It has a lot to do with whether or not we are the country we say we are.
And joining me now is Republican Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio. He chairs the House Judiciary Committee. And in fact, any police.
What he says there is any police reform bill is going to have to go through Jim Jordan's committee. That's kind of the answer as to whether the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that passed the House and never made it to the Senate in the last Congress, that gets rid of qualified immunity, which is really important, and I'll talk about that a little later. It's never going to make it through Jim Jordan's committee, right? But that's not the Jim Jordan clip I'm going to show later, as I said. But I thought that was a pretty good news summary. I mean, this one and the ABC one and the CNN one are all good. I mean, compared to what you saw from Fox News. I mean, I'm watching this footage over and over again now. All the clips I show you, I watch 3 times basically. I watch the clip when I watch the 5 news shows, and then I watch the clip again when I'm capturing it to import into my software and live stream to you, and then I watch it a 3rd time with you during the live stream. So like all of these videos and I actually originally watched most of the hour of video that was released. The one part that was in the 1 hour that was released that didn't make it into any of these news summaries. So this is my criticism of all the news summaries. There's this one part where one of the officers is like saying, like, did you see how he reached for my gun? I'm going to say he reached for my gun, or something like that, where like he's setting up his, like, he reached for my gun defense, which, I mean, one of the things that kind of saved this prosecution, or that made this, that made it more, made it easier for the police chief to fire them and for the DA to charge them is it wasn't just their body cams, and a lot of the stuff we're seeing is from the body cams. There was also like an overhead surveillance video that showed more than the body cams. And actually, if you watch all this body cam video, like I said, we're going to watch it over and over again now in the news summaries. You'll hear them saying things like, give me your hands, when like the overhead video shows like they already they're holding onto his arms. So there are all sorts of things that cops are trained to say for their body cams to pick up the audio that is like the opposite of what's happening, like stop resisting, or gun, or there are all sorts of stuff they say to like prove that they were acting, reasonably in fear for their lives. And some of it you hear in this body cam video. But I think actually the other thing I thought NBC didn't do, or there's that like really plaintive part where he's calling for his mom, and then they have the clip of his mom saying to find out that he was calling for me. Those clips should have been closer together, I thought, in the news summary. That's one other little criticism of NBC. And here's the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, Martha Raddatz, and then their reporter on the scene, Stephanie Ramos, talking about the same facts, I think in a little better way, but I'll talk about that with you a little more after we watch that news summary together.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. It is hard to find words strong enough to describe the horrific video showing Tyre Nichols beaten by Memphis police officers. The 29-year-old, unarmed, supposedly stopped for a traffic violation, shoved, dragged, repeatedly kicked in the face, punched, tased, pepper sprayed, and pummeled with a police baton, all while crying out for his mother. The police videos, more than 1 hour long, show it all. The violence, profanity, and appalling lack of humanity from the officers as they fist bump one another while Nichols lay motionless and bleeding on the pavement. Tyre Nichols died in the hospital 3 days later. The video evoking the beating of Rodney King by Los Angeles police officers more than 30 years ago. So far, nationwide protests have remained peaceful, and Nichols' family has praised the swift action taken against the officers as the family mourns their loss. But what now? What will change? We'll look at all that this morning, beginning with ABC's Stephanie Ramos in Memphis, who brings us the latest on the police video, the arrests, the fallout, and what comes next. Good morning, Stephanie.
Good morning, Martha. The family of 29-year-old Tyre Nichols hopes his death is a catalyst for change in this country. Just last night, Memphis Police announced they were disbanding the street crimes unit known as the Scorpion Unit. That is the group the 5 officers charged in Nichols' death belonged to. It's one of many moves the family pleaded for. Again, we do want to warn you, some of this video you're about to see is disturbing and graphic. Renewed calls for police reform during largely peaceful protests this weekend after the release of harrowing body camera footage showing the beating of 29-year-old Tyre Nichols. On January 7th at 8:25 in the evening, what should have been an ordinary traffic stop immediately escalated when Memphis police officers pulled over Nichols and dragged him out of his car.
Damn, I didn't do anything.
Officers tackling him to the ground.
Hey, you guys are really doing a lot right now. Bro, lay down.
Nichols wrestles free and sprints away. 7 minutes later, police catch up with him at a second location. We can hear and see Nichols complying.
Get on the ground.
Nichols then yells for his mom. Her home about 100 yards away.
Mom!
The 67 minutes of footage shows several angles of the violence and aggression officers used toward Nichols, repeatedly kicking him, punching him in the face while his hands are in handcuffs behind his back, and hitting him with a baton.
Watch out. I'm a baton.
5 officers beat him for nearly 3 minutes before more arrive on scene. But it takes roughly 20 minutes before any provide Nichols with medical attention or aid. 3 days later, Nichols died at the hospital. This week, just 16 days after his death, all 5 officers fired and facing felony charges, including second-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping and assault. Nichols' family asking for accountability for all involved.
I feel that everyone there should be charged from both scenes. Paramedics that came out, that stood around and didn't do anything, they're just as guilty.
Hey, sit up, bro.
Nichols' family calling for the creation of Tyre's Law in Tennessee, which would require officers to intervene if they see crimes committed by a fellow officer.
I believe there was a sense of groupthink in the mentality of what was happening. And it's just very unfortunate that nobody stepped forward to say enough.
Nichols' mother and stepfather telling ABC News Tyre was a peaceful and charismatic man. Here's their message this weekend.
I want people to see that police officers are still brutalizing young black men. I want people to see that we still have a long way to go.
Despite the body camera footage, it's still unclear why Nichols was pulled over in the first place. Police initially said it was for reckless driving, but the police chief told ABC News they haven't been able to verify that in any video. Now, attorneys for 2 of the former officers say their clients intend to plead not guilty. Attorneys for 3 of the other officers have not commented. Martha.
Our thanks to you, Stephanie. Joining me now is the attorney representing Tyre Nichols' family, Ben Crump.
And I'm actually going to have an extensive clip of Martha Raddatz's interview with Benjamin Crump, which I thought was, I guess, sort of the best direct examination, because it wasn't like a hostile witness type interview, but it got a lot of good facts out from Benjamin Crump, more than the other interviews. He was on multiple shows. And I like the fact that they talked about Tyre's Law, that they're trying to get, the families already has like a legislative agenda where they're trying to get a law passed that would require basically the opposite of the blue code or the thin blue line or whatever you want to call it, where like cops, you know, they say that they're just a few bad apples and they're, you know, most cops aren't bad. But the thing is, do you consider a cop a bad cop if they will cover and lie for a cop who does something bad? Because then you're expanding the range of bad cops to maybe a majority of cops are going to cover for other cops and spin things for other cops. And that's why it's important to have a law that makes that illegal, that like not speaking out, not stopping someone from engaging that type of activity, that should be a crime. And anyway, that's why one of the reasons I like the ABC news summary better than the NBC, but you can tell me which one you think was better in the comment section. I'm going to get to the last 2 news summaries, both of which are much shorter. First, the 90-second one from CNN State of the Union. Dana Bash has a little bit of the, we don't have to watch a lot of the body cam and the surveillance camera that is overhead that I was telling you about, that was actually key in addition to the body cam footage. But anyway, here is CNN State of the Union news summary on a lot of the same facts that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the state of our union is sickened and heartbroken. Americans are grieving today, and they are demanding change, with protesters taking to the streets in cities across the U.S., spurred by the sight of 5 police officers mercilessly beating Tyre Nichols while he calls for his mother and begs to go home. On Saturday, the Memphis Police Department disbanded the so-called Scorpion Unit, whose officers, ironically, had focused on areas of rising violent crime. Of course, 5 members of that unit are now the ones charged with second-degree murder in Tyre's death. There are still a lot of outstanding questions about the reason he was pulled over and whether anyone else will be charged in his death, and also why an initial police statement downplayed the horror that we have all now seen on tape. Officers intensely, aggressively going in hot from the moment they pulled Tyre Nichols over. I want to warn you, the footage you're about to see is extremely disturbing and includes some graphic language.
Get the fuck out the fucking car. Damn, I didn't do anything. Hey, I didn't turn your ass around. All right. On the ground. All right. You don't do that, okay? Get on the fucking ground.
Joining me now is the attorney representing Tyre Nichols' family, Ben Crump. Thank you so much for.
So I don't know. That news summary at least didn't make us watch a lot of the video, although it was all just the initial taking Tyre Nichols out of the car, not the whole overhead shot of the kicking and beating that happened at the end. That is like really more of the story. So I don't know. Not that I wanted to watch it again, but if you're like comparing the news summaries, that one might have been a little bit lacking, but you can let me know what you think in the comment section. I've been reading the live comments along the way. Oh, and I wanted to thank, is it Kaim or Kaim, Kaaem, for the 10 Norwegian kroners. I think I've gotten Norwegian kroners before. I think 10 Norwegian kroners is like $1, but I still appreciate everyone who gives me financial support through the Super Chat contributions, or there are links right under the video to becoming a monthly patron on Patreon or a one-time PayPal contribution. I noticed that this video has already been demonetized. I was kind of, last week I was expecting when I talked about the Lunar New Year shooting, it would get demonetized, and it never did. But this week with all the killing, video, disturbing video that you see, all the anchors are saying this video could be disturbing. So it makes me think this video is going to be demonetized. So if you want me to cover topics like this that YouTube won't monetize, you can follow the example of, is it Kaem? Kaim? Is that Kaaem? I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that, but I appreciate the 10 Norwegian kroners. I appreciate all of the support, financial and otherwise, I get from my viewers, so thanks for that. And the final news summary, I don't know, sometimes Face the Nation just doesn't do a news summary, and this one, they sometimes give just like this weird, obtuse reference to what the main news is, and that's kind of what Margaret Brennan did at the beginning of Face the Nation. It's like, we will have updates on the evolving situation in Memphis. The evolving situation in Memphis is all, and then she goes right to her big interview with Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. So, I mean, kudos to Margaret Brennan for getting that interview, although that's not the clip I'm taking. I'm actually going to take a clip of okay cross-examination of a former police chief from Florida, now member of Congress, Val Demings, who was also on Face the Nation. But anyway, before we get to that, here is the very brief Face the Nation news summary at the beginning of their program. That's, like I said, just this obtuse reference to the evolving situation in Memphis over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We have a lot to get to this morning, including the latest on the evolving situation in Memphis. But we begin with the new Speaker of the House, California Republican Congressman Kevin McCarthy.
So yeah, that was like not even really a news summary, but it was like I said, the obtuse reference. But now I want to get to 3 different newsmaker clips on my main topic about police reform failure. And this is kind of an update, or this is an adjunct to my Fox News Sunday news summary. I was talking about how they spun things in terms of being pro-cop. And one of the people who they have on is this all the time on Fox News. And I watched his excuses for what happened in Memphis evolve over time. This former police officer, Ted Williams, he's a black police officer, like the officers who committed this crime and against Tyre Nichols. And he is like one of the hugest apologists for police over and over again. He was like first saying, "Oh, I don't think they were trained enough," and then when it turned out that some of them were older, he was like, "Oh, their adrenaline was pumped up." He came up with like all the excuses, and in this clip, he's Shannon Bream. I mean, I guess to her credit, actually asks a question about defunding the police and giving, sometimes in a situation you don't want someone with a badge and a gun to show up to a situation. There are some jurisdictions that aren't even having police engage in traffic enforcement. Like in Berkeley, California, they're using like cameras and mailing tickets to people instead of having police officers with a gun pull people over, because that's one of like the worst ways that police have these types of encounters. And also like mental health responders. If people are having mental health crises, they don't need a cop with a gun. They need like a social worker or a psychologist, and that's kind of what the Washington Post is talking about. And of course, Ted Williams, this commentator who is always so pro-cop, he says, no, the people who should be overseeing law enforcement are law enforcement. And that's kind of ridiculous, as I'll talk about after I show the clip. And then they have Jonathan Turley talk about the federal civil rights investigation, the Section 1983 investigation. Like, did these police officers violate Tyre Nichols' civil rights? And he, for some reason, says it's a accusation of racism when it doesn't even have to include racism. But like I said, I'll talk about that more after we watch this panel discussion that was totally unbalanced on the Fair and Balanced Fox News program.
The Washington Post had an opinion piece yesterday that said getting the police under civilian control and not killing people may require drastically reducing the number of officers and their powers, or creating entirely new public safety agencies led by non-cops to replace existing police departments. Ted, you understand all different sides of this. What's your reaction?
Well, I'm somewhat opposed to what the Washington Post is wanting to put in place. I believe that law enforcement officers quite naturally should do the right and proper thing, but I think they should be under the control of law enforcement. And when you look at what happened in Memphis, Tennessee, it is the exception and not the norm. You have a lot of good men and women throughout this country who serve in law enforcement, and they go out there every day and they protect the citizens in their community. So I'm somewhat opposed to that, to be honest with you, Shannon.
Okay, so we have state investigation, we have federal investigation. And Jonathan, you wrote about it. The federal investigation, at least the civil rights part of it, may be premature at this point. Explain.
Well, I think it is premature. This is not uncommon to see officers lose control, unfortunately, in a physical confrontation. The most likely explanation is that this is a lack of training and a loss of control. But the administration decided they wanted to launch a civil rights investigation. We saw the same thing happen in Trayvon Martin's death. And I raised the same questions there, because when you create a civil rights investigation, it can complicate things for people on the scene. There was a long rule that you wait for the state investigation prosecution to be finished, and then you launch your federal side. In Trayvon Martin, in 2015, they just quietly ended that investigation. Now, by saying there's a civil rights investigation, there's some positive aspects. You amplify that you're taking these concerns of racism seriously. But it can also amplify that you believe that this was caused by racism. You sort of fulfill that narrative. It's not clear that that's the case here. It looks like a bunch of officers who lost control, who had no supervision, and it seems like precious little training.
The New York Times put it this way.
So yeah, I don't know why they cut back to Ted Williams there when he was talking about racism, like, oh, show a shot of the black guy when they're talking about racism for some reason. But the civil rights investigation, there is, you remember, you've heard some talk about Rodney King. The officers who beat Rodney King, they were acquitted in state court, but then they were charged under federal civil rights laws for violating someone's civil rights. That means you've just taken away someone's life, liberty, or property under color of authority. That's why the Trayvon Martin thing didn't work, because George Zimmerman wasn't really under color of authority. But these cops were definitely under color of authority. And if they take away someone's life, liberty, or property without due process or in violation of their rights under color of authority, that it doesn't require racism at all. I don't know what Jonathan Turley's talking about there. And it's the talking point you see there is what you often see from the pro-police left and right. There are Democrats who are pro-police also, who, we just need more officers, more supervisors, more training. And that's the thing that there's been like a real failure of police reform. I mean, in Memphis, they've had more training. They've had like more diversity in the police department, where it like looks, 60% of the people in Memphis are black, and the police force is starting to look very much like that. But that doesn't stop the racism. That doesn't stop the use of excessive force. That's the whole point. And that's why people get to like defund the police, abolish the police, because there have been all these police reforms. And you saw Ted Williams try to justify it there. You'll also see Democrat Val Demings, former police chief in Florida, now member of Congress, questioned by Margaret Brennan over on CBS News' Face the Nation, and actually brings all these things up, and especially about the failure of police reform. And still lets Val Demings get away with all these pro-police talking points that we need more training and more supervision, like more money for the cops, when this is the way they're acting. It's a hard argument to make on this weekend, at least, after we watched those Memphis police officers. But anyway, I'll talk about Val Demings' argument and Margaret Brennan's cross-examination of her a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
It stood out to me that those 5 officers in Memphis were between the ages of 24 and 32 years old. They were all hired within the last 6 years. Is this an experience problem? Is this a bad cop problem?
Margaret, it is so important that we look at, as police executives, and there's not much of an appetite, we know, in Washington, D.C. now to come up with the national standards that I believe are so desperately needed. I also question what state legislatures are willing to do. But this falls back now on police executives, our chiefs, our sheriffs, to come up with much needed reforms that start with hiring the brightest and the best, having psychological evaluations being a part of that to ensure fitness for duty. And look, I'm more than familiar with specialized units. Many of them are the results of calls from the community for officers to address crime activities and like drug activity, gang activity. But we have to make sure as police executives that we are putting the most seasoned and most experienced officers in this unit that are well trained and highly supervised. So as I look at the night that went off the rails in Memphis, there are a lot of questions that are unanswered, but have to be answered.
But we are hearing from mayors across this country that they are facing, in many places, shortages of police officers, people willing to do the work. The mayor of New Orleans was here last week telling us that. She's now asked for federal marshals and ATF agents in her city. Why is this such a problem?
Well, hiring as someone who has actually hired law enforcement officer, it has always been challenging, not necessarily because of the lack of numbers, but the effort to make sure that we are hiring people who have the right temperament to be able to do the job. I can remember in a year having 40,000 people who wanted to be Orlando police officers, and we ended up hiring maybe 20 of that 40,000, trying to take every effort, every step to make sure that we hire the best person to do the job. And so hiring has always been challenging. But we also, again, police executives have to be creative, not just wait for people to knock on that door, but to go out into various communities, visiting college campuses, making sure that police departments do continue to reflect the diversity of the communities that they serve. This is a time that we have to use new and creative approaches to making sure that we're bringing in the right men and women. It really starts with hiring. Making sure that we are bringing in the right men and women to do the job.
How would you judge the performance of the Memphis police chief, who has said this unit, the Scorpion unit, did good work?
You know, I know C.J. Davis. She is a professional law enforcement officer. She worked as a deputy chief in Atlanta, the chief of Durham. She is now, of course, the chief in Memphis. And I think that she has handled this very tragic incident as well as she could. We all have commented on the swift action with the firing them, working very closely with the DA to bring those charges forward in a very expeditious manner. She's also been very transparent with the community, and boy, do we need to see more of that. She was also the president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. She is very well trained, and I do believe, while this is one of the toughest moments in our country, that she is the right leader to lead us through this very tough time.
Well, I wonder, because I was reading a piece in New York Magazine entitled "The End of Police Reform," and it pointed out that in Memphis, adaptations had been made since 2020 in terms of mandating de-escalation, banning chokeholds. There were body cameras. That wasn't a deterrent here. The police force is 60% black, it reported, with a black police chief. Even with these adjustments, this horrific situation happened. So when you hear calls for police reform, what is the piece of reform you think that makes the difference? Or is it just recruitment?
Margaret, we have made calls for police reform, especially since the brutal death of George Floyd. Now, let me say this. I was in Congress during the time voted for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which, we all know it was not perfect. But my goodness, I sure believe it was a major step in the right direction. And I think that too many police executives think that any criticism of the police or any efforts to reform or modify hiring standards, modify training standards, make sure they have the technology that they need to better be able to do the job, calling for national databases and better enforcement. Too many people see that as we're not supporting the police. Well, I see it as exactly that. Supporting the police, giving them the tools that they need to do the job, but also to hold them accountable. And so, it's not just hiring, but it doggone sure starts with hiring. When they're in training, making sure that we have the right field training officers who we know set the standard for what's acceptable and unacceptable on the street. Looking at internally at policies and modifying those use of force policies. Yes, the body cameras. Think about if we did not have this footage. But this situation was so off the rails and so outside of the box. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there.
I hear your passion there. Thank you.
So yeah, that was Val Deming's argument for police reform. She talked about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and she did mention accountability, but not really one of the big sticking points and one of the most important changes that was in that legislation, getting rid of qualified immunity. He's talking about how, I think it's 18 U.S.C. Section 1983. Is that correct? Do I have the title correct? I know I have the section, USC 1983. Is that right? No, it's 42 USC Section 1983, Civil Action for Deprivation of Rights. That's the civil action where, and some people call this the Ku Klux Klan Act. It says that you can sue people for violating your civil rights. And what's not in the law that the Congress passed? Qualified immunity. This idea that you can't sue police officers unless they're doing something that has already been found to be constitutional in a way that they know for sure they're violating someone's rights. If if it's not like, if every police officer doesn't know that what they're doing is a violation of constitutional rights, well, then they're immune from being sued for it. And that's like the ridiculous qualified immunity doctrine that the Supreme Court came up with, that's not in 42 USC section 1983 anywhere. And that's one of the things that really stops police officers from being held accountable for their violations. Not only just the police officers individually, but the police departments and the cities or counties that they work for. It's like an atrocious legal standard that was made up out of whole cloth by the so-called textualists on the Supreme Court, and it has to be abolished. And I wish that Val Demings had talked about that more rather than more money for cops. That's like one of the things that seems ridiculous in these situations, that and you hear it on Fox News. You also hear it from pro-police Democrats like Val Demings, who used to be a police chief. She's saying we need more supervisors, more training. That means like more money to police departments, rather than what I was talking about when I showed that Fox News panel discussion, Washington Post saying less money, less cops, less jobs for cops to do. We can give those jobs to like, traffic enforcement, we can give to like cameras and, then the mail to send the tickets, or mental health crises should be handled by not cops with guns, but social workers or psychologists or that kind of thing. And anyway, that's not something you hear from pro-police Democrats like Val Demings, but I think some of the most revealing answers about police reform were from Benjamin Crump, the attorney for Tyre Nichols and for a lot of victims of police violence. And it was actually Martha Raddatz over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, who, like I said, had the direct exam of the week because in a non-confrontational interview got some of the best information from Ben Crump. Here you can see him talking about how this Scorpion unit, this was just like the one, this murder or charged murder that the 5 cops from the Scorpion unit committed on January 7th was just the best documented abuse of power. But there are other instances where they abused their power. You saw Val Demings supporting the police chief who supported the Scorpion unit, which that's one of the problems. You'll also see here that Benjamin Crump talks about how the fact that the 5 charged police officers are black, that doesn't mean it's not racist. And you're also going to see here that he talks about having to change police culture, and he refers to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act needing to pass. And that's the one weakness of his argument, I think. I'm not sure the federal legislation is really going to be the thing that does it, but you'll see him also answering why reforms didn't help, kind of like what Margaret Brennan was asking Val Demings. But anyway, I'll talk about that clip a little more after we watch it together over here.
And speaking of trying to make changes, the Scorpion unit, as Stephanie just mentioned, has now been disbanded. Do you think the officers being part of that unit contributed to this?
We certainly do. We know that there were other members of the community that had been assaulted by this Scorpion unit. One young man who said he was assaulted just 4 or 5 days before Tyre was killed, simply going to get pizza, Martha. He said they attacked him, pulled him out the car, yelled profanity at him, and put a gun to his head. And he tried to report them twice to the Memphis Police Department. His calls were not returned, and it is our belief that just maybe had they paid attention to him, that Tyre Nichols may not have been killed in this tragic manner.
I know you want more reforms, Tyre's Law. There were already reforms in place in Memphis, in particular, a requirement to de-escalate or intervene if another officer is using excessive force. And yet you saw those officers, the brutality, the profanity, the lack of humanity. How does that happen?
You know, as I've said, I believe it's part of the institutionalized police culture that makes it somehow allowed that they can use this type of excessive force and brutality against people of color. And it doesn't matter if the officers are black, Hispanic, or white. It's part of the culture, this biased culture that said this is allowed. And so just as much as those officers are responsible for the death of Tyre Nichols, so is the implicit biased police culture that exists in America.
So you believe there was racial bias towards Tyre, even though all 5 of those officers who've been charged with second-degree murder are black?
Absolutely. Because when you think about it, as I've said previously, in my 25 years of doing this civil rights law all across America, Martha, it is not the race of the police officer that is the determining factor whether they're going to engage in excessive use of force, but it is the race of the citizen. And oftentimes, it's the black and brown citizens that bear the brunt of the brutality. You don't see videos of our white brothers and sisters who are unarmed having this type of excessive force levied against them. I mean, think about all the videos we've seen, Martha.
Back to Rodney King.
Rodney
so how do you
King.
change that culture?
Well, you know, a big part of it is what we talked about with President Biden when he called the parents of Tyre Nichols. I asked the president to use this opportunity when America saw that horrific video, because we talked to him before the video, to marshal back in the United States Senate and have Senator Cory Booker, Senator Schumer, put the George Floyd justice and policing back on the table, and then talk to leader Hakeem Jeffries and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and have the House also push efforts to get police reform, because without federal police reform, I think we're going to continue to see these hashtags proliferate so much, Martha, that we can't keep up with them.
Okay.
And yeah, that was the end of the answer that I thought was a little weak. I mean, the rest of it about the racist system of policing, even when the officers were black, and it's still being racist and not the type of activity we see against people who aren't, black and brown or whatever, or not certainly as often. And all the rest of the answer I thought was good. The last part there about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, that he even said, get to talk to Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi, but the person he's not talking to is Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan. Remember Jim Jordan, that's the clip I'm going to show next, although not on this topic, is the chair of the Judiciary Committee. That's where the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act has to go through his committee, and there's no way that they're going to reform qualified immunity or the other sticking points. They gained one more senator, but they lost the House, and so that is not going through the Congress. That's my prediction. I don't see how it could possibly happen, but that's the last clip on my main topic about, police reform fails again. And, this is something I've been working on a long time, and maybe there are some local issues, some local reforms that can get passed. Certainly in Memphis, Tennessee, they're probably going to have some new reforms in place based on this incident. Whether it's going to push people anywhere else. I mean, after George Floyd, it did help here in Sacramento We got civilian oversight of our sheriff's department with subpoena power that we've been working on for many years. We didn't even get it over the line after Stephon Clark. That was one of the famous unarmed black men killed here in Sacramento. Although actually Tyre Nichols grew up in Sacramento and just moved to Memphis a few years ago. And so there's been a lot of local reporting about him here in Sacramento. So maybe we'll get some more police reform in Sacramento after this. But I mean, I don't know if this is going to be more of a push than George Floyd. I noticed, based in my local activism, that the summer of reckoning after George Floyd did push some local reform efforts. The Stephon Clark shooting got some California legislation passed on use of force and some, like transparency in misconduct records and police decertification, where like if a cop does something bad and gets fired in one jurisdiction, there's like a statewide database at least that stops him from being hired somewhere else. That's something that could happen with federal legislation. So, I mean, there are some reforms that could help, and maybe this is the moment when some of them might pass, but not the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. That's not going to get through the Republican Congress. That's the point I was going to make because of, like I said, Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan. And so I have the last two clips here. Or the last clips that I'm going to show you are not on my main topic. So this is the video that I could make separately and call NBC's Chuck Todd tries to cross-examine Representative Jim Jordan's fire hose of disinformation but still gets wet. And this isn't on my main topic, but it's on the topic of the weaponization of the federal government subcommittee. Jim Jordan is the chair not only of the Judiciary Committee, but this like subcommittee that the Republicans have created to investigate the so-called investigation of the weaponization of the federal government, where apparently the deep state and the liberals in the deep state, but that's what's so crazy about it, is like the CIA and the FBI and all, those are not liberal people. Those are like mostly conservatives, and they're actually a whole bunch of pro-Trump people in the FBI, and that's a whole different story. But you'll see here that Chuck Todd does do some good cross-examination of Jim Jordan about why he won't investigate Trump, just Biden, even though they have some of the same issues. And then Jim Jordan just spews out so much disinformation and misinformation that Chuck Todd is listening, and he does like push back on a couple things. Now, I judge, I used to be a criminal defense attorney, a public defender, and I cross-examination was like my best skill, and it's the best skill for a criminal defense attorney or a public defender. And so I feel I have the ability to judge cross-examination. But one thing that in a trial situation that you get to do, but not in a Sunday morning news analysis show situation, is I can like take notes of every single like bad fact or misinformation or disinformation that's coming out of the witness, and then I can go back and cross-examine on every single point. Jim Jordan spits out so much misinformation or disinformation or whatever that I guess Chuck Todd has limited time and he can only push back on one or two. So can I really criticize him for letting Jim Jordan get away with so many things that are totally untrue and only pushing back on a couple? I mean, at least he did push back on a couple, but he did miss a really important one that I'll talk about a little more after we watch Chuck Todd tries to cross-examine Representative Jim Jordan's fire hose of disinformation, but still gets wet. After that, I'll explain more after we watch the actual clip together over.
Many of the things you want to investigate, when I look at them in isolation, I think they're fair targets. I think they're fair things for you to be questioning. The problem that when you look at it is you want to talk about the weaponization of the Justice Department. You don't want to look at anything that happened during the Trump years. He subpoenaed data on Congressman Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell. That's That is known. He secretly obtained reporters' phone records using the Justice Department. He pressured the Justice Department, Donald Trump did, to go easy on Michael Flynn and Roger Stone. The Justice Department was pressured by Mark Meadows to investigate this election fraud. He even tried to change the leadership at the Justice Department. My point is, if you are concerned about the weaponization of the Justice Department in the Biden years, why not investigate the Trump years?
We're going to look at threats to the First Amendment. We're going to look at what Elon Musk through the Twitter files has displayed is unbelievable. The idea that the FBI was paying Twitter $3.4 million to help them suppress information.
That's not how it works.
Keep information from the American
Twitter to comply with subpoenas. That's the federal law.
Do you think it was okay?
That's a law Congress passed.
Do you think it's okay for the FBI to be meeting every week and suppressing information about a conservative and suppressing the Hunter Biden story, which we know is true? Do you think that's all right? I think most Americans say, no, that's probably information we...
I understand, but this is a private organization that made this decision.
Well, with pressure from the government. That's the point. I can understand a private organization can do it. I don't think it's right, but there shouldn't be pressure from the government. When is the FBI just going to stay out of election process? Just let we the people decide. Let the American people decide. In 2016, they spied on Trump's campaign. 2018, it was the Mueller investigation. 2020, they helped suppress the Hunter Biden story. 2022, they raided the home of a former president 91 days before an election. Maybe just let the American people decide. Maybe just stay out.
But you keep talking about this raid on Donald Trump. The amount of time, there was 9 months between the initial action that the archives made for a request of documents before they even turned it over to the Justice Department. The subpoena was issued 60 days before they actually executed the subpoena. And more importantly, the only time the public found out about it is because Donald Trump told the public about it. This was not some sort of, you paint it as a picture of the FBI did this, this, and this within hours of each other, when it was actually a year and a half of Donald Trump not complying with any of the requests from National Archives. A year and a half. This is not some sort of proof that somehow that they've weaponized and playing politics over here.
They raided Trump's home. They haven't raided Biden's home.
Because Biden didn't defy a subpoena, Congressman. He defied a subpoena. By the way, he had 60 days to comply with the subpoena before they actually executed
President
the search
Trump
warrant.
had documents locked in a room with Secret Service protecting them. President Biden had documents in his garage and in a think tank that was funded by the Chinese. I think there's a difference. President Trump was the only guy who was actually president.
You talk about that. You're worried about the Chinese and Hunter Biden.
No, I'm just saying.
Are you worried about the Chinese and Donald Trump?
They took pictures of.
Are you at all worried about that?
No, I'm not. But they took pictures of the documents at Trump's house. They took no pictures of documents. In fact, it's not just me who would like to know what went on here. Senator Warner said it last week. He would like to get a briefing. He wants to see the documents. And guess what? The FBI is saying no, but they took pictures of the folders in Trump's home.
The issue is not whether what Joe Biden did.
No, the issue is equal treatment under the law. That's the issue.
No, the issue is
treatment under the law.
You do not seem to ever see the same conspiratorial problems when it's a Republican.
Those were all investigated for 4 years, and they continue to do it.
Their Durham investigation investigated everything you're trying to investigate and came up with nothing. Do you not trust Bill Barr and Mr. Durham?
The Mueller investigation, we had 2.5 years of this, and they were going to find Russian collusion, and guess what? They can't. Even though Adam Schiff told us,
the Durham investigation did not come up with any. They investigated all these concerns that you had about the FBI, about made-up snitches, all these things. They didn't find anything. Why is it that you want to reinvestigate it?
They found that Kevin Kleinsmith altered documents, and he pled guilty to it. That's finding. When you got someone at the FBI altering documents in front of the FISA court, that's not finding anything. That's pretty important, Chuck. That's what we're looking.
Find what you are claiming that is out there.
Well,
why couldn't Durham find it?
The Durham investigation is not done. The Mueller investigation is done. And what did he conclude? No collusion, no conspiracy, no coordination. And we had 19 lawyers, 30 agents, $40 million spent on that, and it consumed the country for 2.5 years, and there was nothing there.
Let me ask you about subpoena compliance. You didn't comply with a subpoena from Congress.
So yeah, the only follow-up question from Chuck Todd there is about his subpoena compliance. I mean, you see, he did some good specific cross-examination of Jim Jordan there about, for example, the differences between President Biden finding these confidential or secret documents, classified documents in various places, and then immediately turning them over to the National Archives, and complying with whatever the Department of Justice wanted him to do, and differentiating that from Trump, like claiming that the documents were his and not complying with the subpoena, and 60 days later. And so there was good cross-examination on that. But there were a couple problems with the cross-examination. I mean, first, you remember like the original question that Chuck Todd asked? Here's like that screenshot. So yeah, with that screenshot, you can see these are like ways that the Trump Justice Department weaponized the federal government against the American people. Well, first subpoenaing data on Schiff and Swalwell, secretly obtaining reporters' phone records, pressured by Trump to go easy on, the Justice Department was pressured to go easy on Michael Flynn and Roger Stone, pressured by Mark Meadows to investigate alleged election fraud, all those like Trump Justice Department weaponized against the American people. And Chuck Todd asked all those questions, but didn't follow up on any of them. So he missed all that. And then he did sort of listen to what Jim Jordan was saying about how, well, that stuff's already been investigated by the Democrats. And then Chuck Todd had an answer about the Durham investigation, basically finding nothing, or just this one prosecutor who falsified, a bad cop or a bad prosecutor. That's like what happens every day all over the United States, but whatever. That was like the one thing Durham found was like a bad prosecutor, like lying on a form to get a search warrant. Like cops and prosecutors lie all the time to get search warrants, and this just happened to be a FISA warrant. But all the rest of the stuff, like the oranges of the investigation, that none of that panned out. And the Durham investigation had 2 jury trial prosecutions, both of which ended in acquittals on the whole like supposed Russia collusion thing, and or like the origins of the investigation into Trump's Russia collusion scandal. And that's the thing that I think Chuck Todd really did poorly, is you saw there at the end, Jim Jordan got away with saying the Mueller report found no collusion, no conspiracy, no whatever he said there, like, and there actually was evidence of collusion, and even like claimed Adam Schiff was lying about it, and Chuck Todd did nothing about following up on that. But actually, luckily, I have one more newsmaker clip. This is Adam Schiff defending himself against that charge. Over on CNN's State of the Union, Dana Bash had on Adam Schiff, Eric Swalwell, and Rashida Tlaib, all who have been kind of kicked off committees, or Rashida Tlaib, they're still kicking her off, but Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell have been kicked off the Intelligence Committee by Kevin McCarthy already, and it's this retaliation against Marjorie Taylor Greene. And, well, here you'll see an introduction from Dana Bash on the retaliation aspect, and then Adam Schiff, like, really explaining how there was Russia collusion, and there's even more evidence than he says in this clip, but I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the final newsmaker clip together for the program tonight. Over.
Welcome back to State of the Union. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is following through on one of his promises to retaliate against Democrats who voted to remove 2 Republicans from House committees back in 2021. Now that he has the gavel, McCarthy this week removed 2 Democrats from a key committee and is working on a 3rd. All 3 of those Democrats join me now. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar of Minnesota and Congressman Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell of California. Thank you one and all for joining me. Appreciate it. I know that there's a lot to talk about in terms of the politics of what's happening here, but I want to air out some of the substance of the Republican allegations. And Congressman, I'll start with you. You said that there was direct evidence of the fact that Donald Trump colluded with Russia back in 2016. Special counsel Robert Mueller said in his report, quote, "The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government." Republicans argue that's proof that you used your position on the Intelligence Committee to intentionally mislead Americans, which is why you should not be on that committee.
If you read the Mueller report, he makes clear, even in the first few pages of the report, that he states no conclusion on whether Donald Trump and his campaign colluded with the Russians. But what he does reveal in his report, what we found in our investigation, is that Donald Trump's campaign manager was sharing internal campaign polling data and their strategy for key battleground states with an agent of Russian intelligence, while that same unit of Russian intelligence was helping the Trump campaign, both with a hacking and dumping operation, as well as a social media operation to elect Donald Trump. To most Americans, that is collusion. Now, whether it's proof beyond reasonable doubt of the crime of conspiracy, that's what Bob Mueller was talking about. I've always distinguished between the two. But let me just set the record straight. This is only one of a shifting series of rationalizations and pretexts that McCarthy is using.
Well, let me give you another. He says that this is part of a pattern. Ahead of the first Trump impeachment, you said the committee had not spoken to a whistleblower. In fact, that turned out not to be true. You know, the Washington Post said so in their fact check.
The Washington Post identified that, yes, before the person became a whistleblower, they sought advice from the committee. When I was asked the question, I thought they were referring to whether we had brought the whistleblower in. And I should have been more clear in my answer. But again, let's be clear what's really going on here. McCarthy has said Adam Schiff prosecuted the case against Trump. The Ukraine impeachment was a hoax. He's given 15 explanations. The only real explanation is he needs Marjorie Taylor Greene's vote. He needs Paul Gosar's vote. He wants to retaliate for their removal from the committee. And apparently he believes I was very effective in exposing his misconduct, Donald Trump's misconduct, and that's what they're trying to stop. I think that he benefits from having these smears repeated, and that's part of what he gains from it. But this is a pretext and nothing more.
Yeah, and which is why this is a chance for you to explain and to give your side of that, as opposed to just simply repeating it. On that, Congressman, you were also.
So, yeah, that is Adam Schiff's response to the claims of dishonesty he's gotten from Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy, the claims that Kevin McCarthy is using to kick him off the Intelligence Committee, claiming that Adam Schiff didn't give the evidence of Russia collusion that he said existed. But of course, as you heard Adam Schiff explain there, the Trump campaign through campaign manager Paul Manafort shared polling information with Russian agent Konstantin Kolimnik. And then there was also Roger Stone worked with WikiLeaks to coordinate the release of the hacked Russian material that is collusion, even if it's not criminal conspiracy, if you read the Mueller report. And then he didn't even mention the meeting in Trump Tower, the June 2016 Don Jr. meeting in Trump Tower with a whole bunch of Russian agents asking for them to release dirt on Hillary. That's also Russian collusion, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a criminal conspiracy. And so that is my criticism of Chuck Todd for not, even though he had some good cross-examination there of Jim Jordan, he let Jim Jordan get away with no collusion hoax or whatever, the Russia hoax, which is really the truth being that there was a lot of evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. There just wasn't a prosecutable criminal conspiracy. And that's the point that Adam Schiff made there. And he also defended himself on the Ukraine impeachment hoax that you hear from the Trump people, where no, that also was not a hoax. It wasn't a perfect phone call. And anyway, that's the last clip I want to show you. I might actually take those last couple clips and create like an edited video. A lot of my old time viewers won't watch a video that's like an hour and a half long. This is getting close to an hour and a half here. And so I might make a much shorter video with just a few clips, like a video titled Chuck Todd tries to cross-examine Representative Jim Jordan's fire hose of disinformation but still gets wet. I think I might try to take those last few clips or last couple clips and maybe even add this extra Fox News bias clip I've been thinking about, but like put it together in a shorter video people can watch. So watch for that. But other than that, I will be back next Monday and every Monday for all the way through the 2024 election cycle. That's why I've invested in some new hardware. Hopefully I'll get it all worked out where I can have my regular camera working by next week, and I hope all of this worked out for you. But until next week, and I also wanted to thank Peter Reed for the €10 super chat contribution. I appreciated that. If anyone else wants to support my videos financially, there's a join button underneath the video. In the top 2 links in the video description, go to Patreon and PayPal, as I was talking about earlier at the, I'm dropping stuff. I send off, if you go through PayPal or Patreon, I will give you at the $5 level, I will give you this hashtag LiberalViewer weatherproof vinyl sticker, and also a ACLU Constitution, which I just dropped on the floor so I can't show you. But anyway, thank you all for joining me, and until next week, or until I upload that edited produced video in a day or two based on what I showed you at the end here, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.